Picture this. You're a parent. Your child was right next to you 5 minutes ago. You turn around and they're gone. That specific panic, the one that hits your chest like a physical object, the one that makes your vision narrow and your legs move before your brain finishes the thought, that feeling is not modern. That feeling is not cultural. That feeling is 300,000 years old. But here's what's different. When your child gets lost today, you call someone. You have a phone. You have other adults who can spread out and search. You have roads that go in predictable directions. You have strangers who will help because society has systems for this. When an ancient child got lost 50,000 years ago, there was no one to call. There were no roads. There were no strangers who would help. Strangers were the danger. There was just the forest, or the savanna, or the mountain, and the dark coming in a few hours, and every predator within 5 kilometers that could smell a small human moving alone and afraid. So what actually happened? The answer is not what you think, and it reveals something about our species that most history books never bother to tell you. First, we need to understand what lost actually meant in the ancient world, because it wasn't the same thing it means today. Hunter-gatherer groups were small, intensely small by modern standards. Most bands contained between 20 and 50 people, and that's it. That was your entire world. You knew every face. You knew every voice. You knew every footprint of every person in your group, because in a world without writing, without maps, without any of the information storage systems we take completely for granted, the people around you were the information. The group moved constantly, following game migrations, tracking seasonal plant availability, moving away from areas that had been hunted out. In a single year, a hunter-gatherer band might cover hundreds of kilometers of territory, rarely sleeping in the same place more than a few nights in a row. Now put a child in that picture. Ancient children were not kept separate from the physical world the way modern children are. There were no playpens, no fenced yards, no designated safe zones. Children were embedded in daily life from the moment they could walk. A 3-year-old in a hunter-gatherer band was already moving through real terrain, navigating real distances, exposed to real risk every single day. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer groups, the Hadza in Tanzania, the Kung in the Kalahari, the Agda in the Philippines, consistently document something that shocks modern observers. Children in these groups are given extraordinary physical freedom from a very young age. They climb things. They use tools. They wander. They play unsupervised at distances that would cause a modern parent to call the police. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate preparation for a world that would kill them if they weren't ready for it. But it also meant that getting separated, genuinely, dangerously separated, was a real possibility every single day. Here is where everything you assume about ancient child safety gets quietly dismantled. The modern instinct is to imagine ancient childhood as terrifying, dangerous, a brutal gauntlet where children were lucky to survive. And statistically, yes, ancient child mortality was significantly higher than today. Infection, injury, and starvation killed children in numbers that are genuinely hard to sit with. But here's what the evidence actually shows about how ancient groups treated children. They were obsessed with them, not sentimentally, not in the greeting card way we romanticize childhood today, but in the cold, practical, survival mathematics way that evolution produces when it needs to protect something irreplaceable. Children were the future of the group. Full stop. In a band of 20 to 50 people, every single child represented an enormous investment of resources, years of feeding, teaching, protecting a person who couldn't yet contribute to their own survival. Losing a child wasn't just emotionally devastating. It was a demographic catastrophe. A small enough group losing enough children could simply cease to exist within a generation. So the group built systems. Ancient, invisible, deeply human systems for keeping children alive. The first system was the simplest one. Eyes. Constant, distributed, communal eyes. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy spent decades studying cooperative childcare in hunter-gatherer societies and proposed what she called the alloparenting hypothesis. The argument is this: human children did not evolve to be raised by 2 parents. They evolved to be raised by a village. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, unrelated adults in the band who took genuine, active interest in children that were not biologically theirs. In every hunter-gatherer group studied, children are watched by multiple adults simultaneously without anyone formally assigning that responsibility. It just happens, because the group's survival depends on it happening. This means a child in an ancient band was almost never truly alone. not because someone was holding their hand, but because there were always multiple sets of adult eyes in the general vicinity, tracking where every child was at all times. Getting lost, in the most dangerous sense, usually required a perfect storm of failures. The group moving faster than expected, a child following something interesting in the wrong direction, a moment of collective distraction. It wasn't common, but it happened. And when it did, when a child went missing in an ancient hunter-gatherer group, the response was immediate, total, and coordinated in a way that reveals something extraordinary about how these groups functioned. Anthropologist Kim Sterelny at Australian National University has written extensively about what he calls the apprenticeship model of ancient childhood, the idea that ancient children were embedded in a continuous web of adult supervision and teaching that made genuine separation extremely rare, but also made the response to it extremely efficient. When a child was missing, the group stopped. Everything stopped. Hunting stopped. Food gathering stopped. Movement toward the next campsite stopped. Because in the calculus of ancient survival, a lost child was a crisis that overrode almost every other priority. Why? Because the window was short, brutally short. A small child alone in ancient wilderness faced a very specific timeline. Dehydration in warm climates could become serious within hours. Exposure in cold climates even faster. Predators, leopards, hyenas, large birds of prey for very small children, were a constant background threat that became a foreground threat the moment a child was separated from the group's fire and noise and collective smell. The adults in the group understood this timeline viscerally, not academically. They had grown up in this world. They knew exactly how long a child could be alone before the probability of finding them alive began to collapse. So the search was not casual. It was not organized by committee. It erupted. Here's what modern research on hunter-gatherer behavior tells us about how this search actually worked. Trackers went first. In ancient groups, tracking, the ability to read disturbance in the environment, to identify footprints, broken vegetation, disturbed soil, the direction something small moved through grass, was not a special skill. It was universal adult literacy. Every adult in a hunter-gatherer band could track at a level that would seem almost supernatural to a modern person. A study by researcher Louis Liebenberg working with Kalahari sand trackers documented that experienced hunter-gatherer trackers can follow trails across hard ground with almost no visible marks, reading micro-disturbances in soil and vegetation that trained scientists standing next to them literally cannot see. This skill, practiced from childhood, applied every day for survival purposes, reached a level of environmental reading that has no modern equivalent. When a child went missing, this skill turned immediately to finding them. Adults spread out, not randomly, but in a systematic pattern based on the last known direction the child was seen moving. They read the environment. They looked for the specific small footprint, the disturbed grass at child height, the broken stem that a child's hand would break differently than an adult's. They called out, constantly, because a child who could hear familiar voices would move toward them, and a child moving toward familiar voices was a child making noise that could be tracked. And the group used something else, something that sits underneath all of this and makes it possible. They knew the child, not just their face, their personality, the specific way this particular child moved through the world, which direction they tended to wander, what they were likely following, a bird, a butterfly, a sound. Ancient adults who had been watching a specific child for years had an intuitive model of that child's behavior that functioned as a predictive map. She always goes toward water when she hears it. He follows anything that flies. When she's scared, she goes still and hides. She doesn't run. This knowledge, accumulated through years of close communal observation, narrowed the search space dramatically. But sometimes they weren't found. This is the part of the story that ancient humans lived with in a way we almost cannot imagine. In conditions where the child had wandered far enough, moved in an unpredictable direction, or been taken by a predator before the search began, the outcome was what it was. The group would search until the evidence told them to stop, until the trail went cold, until darkness made further searching more dangerous than it was useful, until the adults had to make the calculation that risking additional lives in the search was no longer survivable math. Archaeological evidence gives us painful glimpses of these moments. Burial sites of young children in Paleolithic contexts, some of the most carefully, tenderly arranged burials in the entire ancient record. Small bodies surrounded by flowers, by ochre, by the most valued objects the group possessed. Evidence of grief that is completely recognizable across 50,000 years. Psychologist Paul Bloom at Yale has argued that grief in humans is not a byproduct of love. It is love's evolutionary function. The pain of loss is what made ancient humans search so desperately, fight so hard, take such enormous risks to prevent losing a child. Without that pain as the consequence, the drive to protect wouldn't be strong enough to keep children alive in a world that was trying to kill them every day. The grief we see in ancient burial sites isn't just emotion. It's evidence of how hard the group tried before they got there. Here is what nobody tells you about the panic you feel when a child goes missing. That panic, the specific, overwhelming, physical panic, is not a modern anxiety response. It's not a product of modern parenting culture or social media or helicopter parenting or anything invented in the last 100 years. It is 300,000 years old. It is the same neurological alarm system that made ancient adults drop everything and search with every skill they possessed the moment a child disappeared. It is calibrated by millions of years of evolution to be so unbearable that you cannot do anything except respond to it immediately and completely. The feeling is not a malfunction. The feeling is the system working exactly as designed. And the village that responds, the strangers who stop what they're doing to help search, the people who share the missing child's photo, the communities that organize search parties for a child they've never met. That's not a modern invention either. That is alloparenting. That is the same cooperative child protection system that kept our species alive for 300,000 years, expressed through the tools we have now instead of the tools we had then. The technology changed. The biology didn't. Every child who has ever been found, in an ancient forest by a tracker reading broken grass, or in a modern shopping mall by a stranger who recognized a frightened face, was found because of the same thing. A group of humans who felt the unbearable weight of a missing child and could not stop until they found them. That response, immediate, total, communal, driven by a grief too large to sit with, is maybe the most human thing there is. It predates language. It predates fire. It predates every civilization and technology and social system we have ever built. Long before we had words for family, before we had words for community, before we had words for anything, we had the thing that made us go looking. And 300,000 years later, we still can't stop ourselves from doing it.